Yikes! I've made it to the top of Cerro Negro, one of Nicaragua's youngest and most active volcanoes, and now I'm staring down 2,200 feet to my Jeep, which looks so tiny it could have been a kid's Matchbox toy. This volcano was completely covered in scree, those jagged little lava pellets, and looked to be a steep 45-degree angle down. And I'm supposed to sit on top of the skinny little board and slide down this mountain? Welcome! Today we're hiking volcanoes in Nicaragua. I know, you're thinking Sandinistas. Don't worry, folks, that was over 2 decades ago. Today, Nicaragua is a peaceful, undiscovered democratic republic, much like Costa Rica was back in the 90s. Tune in to learn why Nicaragua should now be added to your bucket list. Nicaragua is like Costa Rica was decades ago before tourists first discovered it. As Costa Rica's northern neighbor, they both share similar flora and fauna. They both have fabulous beaches and surfing opportunities, and they have volcanoes. However, Nicaragua boasts more biodiversity than Costa Rica and has many more unique ecosystems. About 20% of its countryside is protected land. Nicaragua has over 200 kinds of mammals, 700 kinds of birds, 640 kinds of fish, and almost 5,800 plant species. It's a biodiversity mecca. Being close to the Pacific provides nearly constant balmy temperatures of around 85 degrees. And now it's time for some fun. Most of my trip in Nicaragua would be camping and hiking. However, we did start the trip in the colonial city of Granada, a beautiful city that sits on Lake Nicaragua, which happens to be Central America's largest freshwater lake. In Granada, I wandered around downtown and then boom, wardrobe malfunction. My favorite walking sandals decide that today is a good day to die. The glue had become loose and the top started flopping away from the sole, so I was wandering around flopping like a fish out of water. I remember the market was maybe a half a mile away, so I hobbled my way back there in hopes of finding some sneakers. I did find a pair, but they were a bit snug. Now I had to find some socks because I didn't want blisters to dampen my hiking adventure. I wandered around the market a little bit, and then I met Rosa. Rosa's stall had an assortment of items for sale. I couldn't remember the Spanish word for socks, so I used pantomime to convey my needs. Rosa spoke no English, and my Spanish is butchered at best, so we laughed as we worked out our way through the transaction. Rosa was curious about me, as tourists still aren't overly common in Nicaragua, so we did our best to have a conversation. I explained to her that I was from the U.S. and was here to see her beautiful country and to hike some of its volcanoes. After a while, she poked her head behind a sheet curtain partition and asked her husband to come out. After we were introduced, I did remember the Spanish word for handsome. I told Rosa that her husband was muy guapo. She giggled and then brought out her children for me to meet. It may only have been a 20-minute exchange, but it still brings a smile to me when I think about Granada. Before I left, I asked Rosa for a recommendation as to where to eat lunch. She pointed me to an alleyway between these covered stalls. I couldn't believe that anything could be back there, but Rosa was quite insistent. This is where I was supposed to go. Sure enough, she had directed me to a small kitchen area where an older woman manned a portable grill that served people rice and beans with chicken, the ubiquitous dish of Latin America. I ordered a platter, and the old woman immediately left the area and left me puzzled. I just sat there, and within a few minutes she returned carrying a china plate to serve me my lunch instead of on the paper plates everyone else had. I was touched that she wanted to honor a visitor to her country. Now sated and with happy feet, I headed back to the hotel a few blocks from the historic district. However, before I reached my block, I heard live music starting up behind me, so I made a U-turn and followed the sound. A small band had set up outside a cafe that had some covered patio tables. So I grabbed a table and ordered a drink. Next to me was a table with 4 men in their late 70s or early 80s. They smiled at me and I smiled back. One man spoke a little English and he asked me where I was from. After a couple of minutes of our broken Spanish-English conversation, I was invited over to their table. During our conversation, they kept telling me that I must see Messiah. I must see Messiah because it's so beautiful. I asked them where to find this church, and they said it wasn't a church, but I just wasn't getting what they were trying to tell me. I want you to remember that word Messiah, as it's going to come up later in the program today. An hour later, I bid my goodbyes to the gentleman and headed back to the hotel. After a rest, I went out to the lobby where I met Jamie, a 39-year-old man from Scotland who turned out to be in my hiking group. Jamie was heading downtown, so I said I'd join him. When we reached the square, and all Latin American towns do have a central square where the locals meet to socialize, there was now a large band playing. Families had brought their lawn chairs, the kids were running around, couples were dancing. Jamie and I may not have had lawn chairs, but we did have feet, so we joined the party and hit the dance floor. It wasn't long before a local young man in his 20s cut in and asked me to dance, and then a young woman did the same with Jamie. Jamie and I may not have had their moves, and we didn't share a language, but laughter is indeed universal. We all had a ball. A few partners later, Jamie and I needed a rest, so we bade our goodbyes. I started this podcast with these stories because the cultural interactions are a super important part of travel for me. It adds a deeper layer to my travels. Sometimes you feel a little silly. I'm often doing silly things, but those often end up being some of my favorite memories. I might have to draw a picture or pantomime or just mangle and butcher the language in order to communicate. I think that sometimes it's more fun when you don't speak the language. And I just love it when the light bulb finally goes off for the other person that you're trying to communicate with. I don't recall any trip I've ever taken where a local was anything but gracious, kind, and helpful and trying to help me figure out whatever my issue was. Just smile and do the best you can and try to speak the language, even if it's only please and thank you. They know you can't speak their language as soon as you open your mouth. You're going to butcher it, but most of the time the locals do appreciate you making the effort. Lake Nicaragua is cool, not only because it's so big, but also just off the shoreline is a cluster of islands called Las Isletas, the little islands. There are 365 volcanic islands, some of which have cute little homes on them. In the trees, you'll often see monkeys scampering about, watching you quizzically. You can take a boat tour around the islands and even take a dip in the lake, which I did with some of my fellow hikers. I'd heard that there was a freshwater shark called a bull shark that was in the lake, but I didn't really do any research on it. I did come to find out that they do sometimes attack humans. I didn't know that. There's a fort that you stop on while you're on the boat tour, and while you're there, you'll see a bull shark's jawbone, but the teeth are still in it. It's a pretty big shark. Swimming was probably not my smartest move. Sadly, these sharks are on the decline, so I'm sure my risk was minimal. Mystery solved. Guess what those gentlemen were trying to tell me? It wasn't Messiah, M-E-S-S-I-A-H. It was Masaya, M-A-S-A-Y-A, which is the name of Nicaragua's largest national park and a nearby village. The park has a fabulous exhibit which explains how the volcanoes are formed, and at Masaya, you can stare down the aptly named mouth of hell and smell its pungent sulfur gases in the volcano. You can see lava boiling down inside the crater itself. Nearby, there's a dormant crater lake that you can swim in and climb Volcan Fernando. Up next, El Hoyo, the Hole, a perfect name for this volcano. Unlike other volcanoes that we climbed, which had ragged edges from where the volcano blew, this volcano, called the Hole, looks just like God took an ice cream scoop and decided to make himself an ice cream sundae. The crater hole is a perfect circle. Very cool to see. I'm super excited about the next volcano we climbed, Cerro Negro. You climb up, and then you get to slide back down. This volcano is the youngest in Nicaragua. Cerro Negro was born in 1850, and it's erupted 23 times in its history, the last time being in 1999. Because it erupted so recently, the vegetation hasn't had a chance to grow back yet. So on the side that the lava flowed down, all that's on that mountainside is black volcanic scree, those little lava pebbles. So that's why you're able to slide down without hitting any vegetation. First, you climb up and look at the activity of the volcano. It's quite active, and that was cool in and of itself. And then if you paid the nominal extra fee and carried the little board up yourself, you get to slide down on that wooden sled. It's maybe a skinny little board about 15 inches wide. You use a rope as your steering wheel and your feet as your brakes, and you slide down almost a half a mile over this scree. It is such a hoot. The guides give you a little safety instruction, and they give you a canvas jumpsuit, goggles, and some heavy-duty canvas gloves because should you fall off, I'm sure it could be a little bit sharp. Nobody in our group did fall, and I think as long as you don't go crazy fast, it's very safe, and it's super fun. If you don't want to do the sled, another option is to run down. Our guide Alex, who does this trip maybe once a week or so, runs down, and I swear that man clocked about 10 feet every step he took. It was just remarkable. Climbing and then sliding down Cerro Negro will definitely be one of the highlights when you do this adventure trip. I highly recommend you go to the activetraveladventures.com website and check out all the ridiculous photos of me and my safety getup and watch the short video for yourself. It's just a riot. For those of you unfamiliar with the Spanish word negro, in Spanish it means black, and that's just what I looked like at the end of this sleigh ride. I was covered in lava dust and I cleaned up as best I could with baby wipes, but I was really looking forward to the colonial city of León, our next stop, where I got a chance to get a proper shower, wash my clothes, and explore a fabulous city. One of my absolute favorite hikes of this entire trip was Volcan Telica. This wasn't a particularly challenging hike, but it is spectacular. It's a relatively easy hike up to the base camp, which is a covered shelter that we were able to put our tents under. There's also a little village or community nearby, so we were able to buy dinner from the locals who came up to the base camp and made us a delicious, you'll never guess, chicken with rice and beans. It was delicious though. A really, really nice meal. Afterwards, before the sun set, we climbed up Telika. It's not too hard of a hike, and you get to witness one of the most active volcanoes of your trip. Telika is always spewing something. Unfortunately, the winds were not in our favor to see the lava, but we did get to see lots of plumes of smoke. It was quite interesting, plus all those particulates made the haze in the background of the sunset quite pretty. It's kind of like the way wildflowers also make sunsets so glorious, so it's very similar around volcanoes. And remember how I said there was a little community nearby? A very industrious guy climbed up that volcano with an enormous cooler full of soda and beer to sell us, all iced down for us. I didn't want to have a beer when I was hiking up, but I did promise to buy 2 on the way down if he was still there when I got back. After a bit, our guide hollered over to us and said, "Hey, I want to show you something." So we followed him down this little ridge between the mountains and into a cave. And not just any cave, it was the Bat Cave. Hundreds and hundreds of bats were fluttering about. Oh my gosh, that was so exciting and such a surprise because he didn't tell us what we were going to see. What a thrill. Then we hiked up further yet to a taller peak to witness the sun setting out over the Pacific Ocean. From where we sat, we could see not 360 view, but certainly a 280-degree panoramic view. And it was clear enough to not only see the Pacific Ocean, but also Honduras and El Salvador. Just spectacular. Oh my gosh, it was mesmerizing. Our group of about 15 had kind of spread ourselves out to our little private rock so we could sit and drink in the magic of witnessing Mother Nature at her finest. And all of a sudden, here comes the beer man. He may have broken the reverie, but we were thrilled. Since we'd finished climbing the uphill, we were all ready to buy a soda or beer. So we toasted our drinks, and then we went back to our little private rocks to watch the sun dip down over the ocean. It was just magical, folks. I sure wish you could have been there. We saved the tallest volcano in Nicaragua for last, San Cristobal, which stands at 5,725 feet. We headed out at 5 o'clock in the morning to try to get a head start against the heat because so much of this volcano is exposed. You start off in the forest, but after an hour or so, you're out and there's not a stitch of vegetation because the volcano wiped it all off when it erupted. So we're climbing up and everything's going great, and then we get to the scree field. Remember me talking about scree earlier? We first encountered scree on Cerro Negro, that volcano that I slid down. Climbing the scree field at San Cristobal was one of those 2-step forwards and 1-step back operations. San Cristobal was certainly the most challenging hike of the whole trip simply because A, it's tall, and B, you do all this work and you slide backwards a little bit. I did get a little clever though. Remember Jamie, my dancing partner in Granada? Well, Jamie's a really tall man, and so he made a very big footprint. I got smart and fell behind him using his footsteps as catch holes. It helped me quite a bit. And despite all the muttering of my fellow hikers, when we all made it to the top, no more complaints. You get to enjoy an absolutely spectacular scenery with a 360 view. I posted a video on the summit on the ATA website. Coming down, of course, is much easier because you almost have to run on the scree because it's so steep. I slid on my bum at least a half a dozen times. When we got back, I took a nap. I noticed that I was irritating some bugs under the edge of my tent, so from up inside my tent I kept lifting up the edge in hopes that they would move away and stop interrupting my nap. That night, we had our farewell dinner for our guides. In the morning, packing up my tent, I said, "What on earth are all those holes in my tent?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh." I go out and I look, and the leafcutter ants had eaten my tent. Those were the bugs I was listening to that were interrupting me during my nap time the day before. They had eaten 7 holes the size of dimes and quarters all along the edge of my tent where the water could come through. Gratefully, it didn't rain that night. I was like, "You little buggers." I do have a video on the website of these guys as well because they're kind of cool. Leafcutter ants go up into the trees and bite out dime-sized pieces of leaf that they then bring back to the nest. The leaf shreds decompose and the ants eat the mold from the decomposition. They're fascinating to watch. They make a long line heading back and forth from the nest to the tree. I don't know how I missed their assembly line. I must have been so pooped from climbing Cristobal. But anyhow, I either ticked them off when I clipped their line setting up their tent, or they thought my green tent was a leaf. I'm not sure, but it sure was kind of comical how they wrecked my almost new fancy Big Agnes tent. I want to give a big shout out to Big Agnes because they only charged me $20 to fix it, which I thought was quite reasonable. Anyhow, so we finished up our volcano climbs, and now it's time for a little true R&R. And off to the Redwood Beach Resort we go. This resort is in the middle of nowhere. I think the owner said it was like 21 miles from another hotel. There's a little village, and that's, if you want to call it a village, that has a small little store with some basic necessities and a church. I'm sure there must have been a school there somewhere, or maybe it's inside the church. Other than that, there's a few houses and some farms, but mainly the people seem to subsist off of fishing. Their fishing boats look to be about 4 times the size of a Boston whaler, and they would take them out over these massive ocean waves to get out to sea. It was always so exciting to see them go out and then come back in with their catch. While you're at the resort, they offer all sorts of day trips. You can either relax, as I did most of the time, or you could kayak through the mangroves out onto a river, which I also did one day. You can go deep sea fishing on one of those little fishing boats. You can also go hiking or horseback riding. I was introduced to the sport of pickleball while at Redwood. There's an old tennis court that the owner taught us to play pickleball on, which, unbeknownst to me, is the fastest growing sport in the world. It was so much fun. Pickleball is a combination of tennis, badminton, and ping pong. So you've got this wiffle ball thing that you hit with a modified ping pong paddle on a shortened tennis court. It's a riot. You play it as a doubles game, and all we did was laugh. One thing I like about this resort, because I'm so fair-skinned, is that the trees are right on the beach, so you can sit under a hammock by the ocean but still be in the shade. Redwood also has a really nice big tiki hut and a massive communal outdoor covered dining and community area. Because it's so remote, they have to provide all the food, which I must say was outstanding. One night we even caught our own. When the owners were starting the resort, a homeless man living on the beach came up looking for work. He was hired, and the owner asked him, how did you feed yourself? The man said he was catching ghost crabs and making a soup out of them. And if you know anything about ghost crabs, they're really small, and there's hardly any meat on them, so you can't pick the meat off of them. But what he was doing, and what he showed the owner to do, was to catch the crabs and then boil them and extract the essence and the flavor of the crab, and then we'd just eat the broth. Intrigued, the owner tinkered around with it, and with her culinary skills, she devised a delicious and fun soup. So one night, our group went out with our headlamps and we caught ghost crabs. Ghost crabs live on the beach, not in the surf, and they have these little holes they live down in. At night, they come out and they're looking for their own prey. We were doing our best to chase them down and catch them before they could run down their holes. We would run, and then cup our hands over to trap them. And then as fast as we could, we'd pop them up and throw them into a bucket before they could pinch us, and sometimes they would pinch us. And so anyway, after catching I don't know how many ghost crabs, we brought a bucket full home back to the inn. The next day, we had delicious ghost crab soup for lunch. You've got to check out the picture of that on the website. I should mention that the Redwood Beach Resort is not a resort in the way that I normally think of the word resort. Most of the cabins don't have hot water or air conditioning, so make sure that if that's important to you, that you book one of the few cabins that do. I will tell you that the food's outstanding and the location is Swiss Family Romanesque. They use only whatever is local and fresh available that day, often right off the fishing boats. This made for a really, really relaxing part of our vacation. When I first saw the itinerary, I was going to skip this part of the tour simply because I live by the ocean. I am so glad I went. Nicaragua was a pleasant surprise. Like most of you, I had images of Sandinistas and all that. I found the people to be loving, kind, and so glad that we were there to appreciate their country. The food is very tasty, although you will eat a whole lot of chicken with rice and beans. It's superb if you like to camp and hike and love to explore new cultures. I love Nicaragua. It's fun, it's pretty, it's affordable, and the people are fabulous. Right now is a great time to visit Nicaragua because it's not all that touristy. Plus, it's very economical. However, unlike Costa Rica, it doesn't yet have a large tourist infrastructure in place, which makes it harder for you to plan your own adventure or to move yourself and luggage around. If you're going camping, etc., I recommend hiring a small tour company to arrange your trip, even if you're going just as a group of 1 or 2. It's not all that expensive, and you get the added bonus of a cultural exchange with your guide. Currently, there aren't many tour companies that have pre-planned multi-day adventure trips, so the tour companies generally just custom tailor your adventure to your specifications, which I think is kind of cool. Nicaragua is still figuring out this whole new tourism industry at this point. A little more than 2 weeks after I arrived in Managua, it was time to head home. Looking back, I would say this is a great adventure for somebody that doesn't mind roughing it a little bit, because like I said, the infrastructure is just not quite there if you're going to do the hiking trip without camping, unless you want to spend a lot of time in the car. I recommend you rotate between camping and then head to a city to get cleaned up a little bit, and then go back to camping, city, back and forth, and so on. If you want to explore this trip more, you can download the free printer-friendly Nicaragua cheat sheet and see the complete show notes at activetraveladventures.com. Enter Nicaragua in the search box or click on the podcast episodes link. This is episode number 1. Be sure to check out my pictures in the video, especially that ridiculous one of me getting ready to slide down the Cerro Negro volcano. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Active Travel Adventures podcast today. If you don't know how to, there's a little video on my website that can show you how. And if you have, thanks so much for your support. Could I also ask you to please share this podcast with another adventurous friend of yours? There's a share button on whatever you're listening to that looks like a square box with an arrow on it. Click on that box, and from there you can email, text, or post this link on any of your favorite social media channels. So many folks today don't even know what a podcast is. You can open them up to this fabulous world of podcasts. I sure do appreciate all your help and support. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adventure on!